Hey guys, hope you're doing well. You're able to get out a little bit and get some fresh air, not just be cooped up inside all day. It's all about balance. So we're moving on into our drugs and alcohol unit, and we're going to start with talking about something I'm sure you're all very familiar with, not necessarily by experience, but I'm sure that there are quite a few of you that are kind of getting involved with vaping. And so since this is becoming more and more prevalent, especially among teens, I think it's important that we address this. So I'm just going to go through this little PowerPoint that I made, show you a couple of video clips, and then you guys will be expected to do a little bit of research on your own. I might quiz you on some stuff, and then I do want you to interact with your peers, so there will be at least a discussion question about this. So just a heads up with that. So I don't know if you knew this, but e-cigs and vape pens and all that stuff has kind of been around for a while, since 2007, but they've evolved quite a bit, where this is more what you're probably seeing these days. And then as far as the anatomy of one, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but you've got the battery, the atomizer, which heats the e-liquid. You have the e-liquid, which we're going to get into that. A lot of teens that I've come to the conclusion that the ones that argue are the ones that are using, but a lot of students in the past have said that they there's a lot that doesn't have nicotine, but I think that you'd be surprised. Most, if not all, of the e-liquid out there actually does have nicotine in it, and that's what can become really dangerous. I mean, aside from all the other particles, which we'll talk about in just a second, it's not just water vapor. Then you have the cartridge that holds the e-liquid, and then the aerosol. So we're going to get into this a little bit. We'll go to the next slide. This is what I was kind of talking about. So first of all, here's the definition, and then aerosol. But here's the bottom line. It contains other chemicals that you're breathing in. I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's just water vapor. Like, it is not just water vapor. So I hope you understand that and you remember that, especially if you're a user. So I already kind of talked about a little bit of this, so we'll just kind of move on. But just know that these are the things that I'm pretty nervous about. I mean, yes, like flavorings, that anytime you're adding any kind of flavoring, even in food and stuff, it can be really harmful to your body. But the fact that it contains a lot of nicotine, and then it's not just water vapor, there's actually particles that you're putting into your body, in your lungs, really. Like, take a deep breath and appreciate that you can take a deep breath. Some people aren't able to do that. And users, heavy users and extensive users, long-term users of this, we're finding are being admitted and experiencing problems with their lungs. So be aware of that. I kind of gave you the answer to this. Most e-cigarettes contain nicotine. I think I mentioned this earlier, that this was pretty interesting. 99% of e-cigarettes contain nicotine. It's important for us to discuss this because it can have even more harmful effects for people your age because your brains are still developing. I think that's this next slide. Okay, so why are we stressing nicotine and addiction and how dangerous it is among your age group? This kind of explains it right here. So your brain is still developing. I think I've mentioned that in other lessons. So each time a new memory is created, stronger connections, or they're called synapses, are built. Your brains build those synapses faster than adult brains. So it's kind of like you're able to learn that behavior, which becomes addiction, a little bit faster. And so the nicotine in e-cigarettes also can prime your brain for addiction because of those strong synapses and your ability to build them faster. All right, let's see. See if I want to point anything out from this one. You can read through it, but just again, your brains are still developing. Because of the part of your brain that's in charge of like decision making and the impulse control kind of behaviors, you're maybe more likely to make risky behaviors. Which, just a reminder, you need to make sure you've done that life skills. I think it's unit 3 on risk taking. That kind of plays into this as well with this lesson, this unit that we're getting into. Here's just a little infographic about how nicotine works in your body. The one part I want to point out is this. Nicotine, it reaches your brain super quick, and we've already talked about dopamine, the feel-good chemical. You start to feel amazing, but this doesn't last for very long, and it wears off, which is why we'll just use the cigarette example. Like people that are smoking 1 or 2 packs a day, it's because they need that nicotine to feel good and feel, I guess, get rid of the withdrawal. Because if they're addicted, they're going to go through withdrawal, which could be like headaches or irritability or I don't know, nausea. So it reaches your brain in 10 to 20 seconds, and then it doesn't last very long, which is why you continue to use the substance, in this case, vape. This is pretty interesting. So if you've taken chemistry, you might be familiar with the pH scale a little bit. Basically, it measures chemicals, what chemicals are in liquids. So here's something I'm going to go back and forth between these slides. So most nicotine is what we call freebase, which is blue. Okay. All right. The more blue, the more volatile or crazy it's going to be. So it's going to be harsh on your throat. Okay. So manufacturers of Juul have actually found a way around this. So they added a chemical, of course, which causes it to be more red. Okay. Which means that you're able to handle it on your throat. It's what they call nicotine salts rather than freebase. So let me go back. Sorry. So nicotine salts, which is not as harsh on your throat because of the chemical that they've added, versus the freebase, which is really bad and hard on your throat. So it just allows, again, for not just like everyone, but especially like young people to be able to tolerate it, I guess, because it's not as harsh on your throat, and you can get hooked that way. I'm going to show you this really quick.
Some have suggested that the use of e-cigarettes by young people might protect them from using tobacco cigarettes. There is no evidence to support this claim. Some studies show that non-smoking youth who use e-cigarettes are more likely to try conventional cigarettes in the future than non-smoking youth who do not use e-cigarettes. And among high school students and young adults who use tobacco, more use both e-cigarettes and burned tobacco products than use e-cigarettes alone. Burned tobacco products, like cigarettes, are responsible for the overwhelming majority of tobacco-related deaths and disease in the United States.
I just think this is interesting because most people say that they go to vaping to get off of cigarettes, but there's studies that kind of show differently. Okay, super crazy right here. So you guys have probably heard pod. So a single Juul pod contains at least as much nicotine as a pack of regular cigarettes. So 1 pack equals 1 pod. I don't vape, so I don't know how long it takes for someone to go through a pod, but that's kind of an interesting fact to bring awareness, I guess, if nothing else. Gotta see how much time I have left. I think we'll show you this video real quick.
This is an x-ray of a patient's lungs. And here's an x-ray of those same lungs just 5 days later. See all that light gray? That's fluid, which filled their lungs because of a life-threatening lung disease, linked to vaping. For years, vaping has been touted as a safer alternative to smoking cigarettes. But now, some vaping products are killing people. So what's going on? And is it really bad for you? Vaping typically refers to inhaling an aerosol, which contains either nicotine, in the case of e-cigarettes, or some form of cannabis, such as the psychoactive chemical THC. And in the last few years, it has exploded in popularity, especially among teens. I mean, just look at this graph. It shows the percent of high school students who use e-cigarettes. In 2018, it was over 20%. And that's what makes this news so scary.
A patient died from a severe respiratory illness, and it could be the country's first vaping-related death.
That was in August of 2019. And by early September, the number of reported deaths linked to vaping had climbed to at least 6. Not to mention, there were at least 450 possible lung injuries tied to both THC and nicotine vape pens.
I have been saying this from the beginning. Looks like it's becoming an epidemic.
That's Dr. Melody Prasada, who's treated at least 2 patients with what she calls vaping-associated lung injury.
So over here we are seeing our 18-year-old patient who, when he first presented to the emergency room with chest pain, fever, coughing, and vomiting. And as you see over here, it is the black is for the lungs, and you see nice still black.
But 5 days later, his lungs were filled with fluid because of inflammation, which she said was linked to vaping THC.
Once you come to this point, the chance of dying can be as high as 70%.
So what's causing all that inflammation, all of these lung injuries? The short answer is, we don't really know. Doctors say it's likely not the nicotine or THC itself, but rather other chemicals inside the liquid which get vaporized when you inhale. One possible culprit is vitamin E acetate, which health officials have found inside many vape pens that have been linked to the recent string of lung injuries.
When you start inhaling oils, any type of oil, vitamin E is an oil. Any type of oil, if you start to inhale to your lungs, you are going to create problem inside your alveoli.
Alveoli are small bubbles inside your lungs that transfer oxygen to your blood. And she says that vitamin E could interfere with a lining that surrounds them called pulmonary surfactant. But according to Dr. Mikhail Kazachkov,
I don't think vitamin E is the only guilty, substance here.
Because when it comes to vape pens,
You're going to inhale dozens of other substances, which are not necessarily advertised, but they're there. There is definitely needs to be a carrier, a vehicle, because nicotine cannot be delivered just in a pure form.
until researchers find out what's behind vaping-associated lung injuries, the CDC says don't vape. But here's the thing. Lung injuries? They're actually not the only risk associated with vaping. One small study, for example, found that kids who used e-cigarettes might be exposed to higher levels of nicotine than those who used traditional cigarettes.
It would not be unusual to have extraordinary high concentration of nicotine in vape.
And
Nicotine is not benign.
it raises your blood pressure, which can increase the risk of having a heart attack. And if you're a teen,
It is known to cause problems with the brain development.
not to mention, it's highly addictive. Now you might be thinking, well, isn't vaping still better for you than smoking? But the answer isn't so simple. You see, smoking is really bad. It kills more than 480,000 Americans each year. And vaporizers, they typically contain fewer toxic chemicals than the 7,000 or so found in cigarettes. But at least in the short term,
There is absolutely no reason to say that vaping is healthier than smoking. In my opinion, vaping is worse because we are scared. We don't know what to do.
so if nothing else, there's probably a better alternative to smoking than vaping. And if you're not already a smoker, you definitely should not start vaping now.
It is at this point very clear that vaping is not only unhealthy, but it is very dangerous. This is not anymore a debate. This is a proven fact that vaping is killing people.
Pretty interesting. Just kind of, I don't know, brings up at least like hopefully gets you thinking a little bit about your choices. We talk about like staying on the the health continuum and making sure that you're in charge of your health and you're doing what you need to do to stay healthy. And I don't know. I think that for me, I kind of think about like years ago when tobacco and like smoking cigarettes was starting to become a thing. There wasn't enough research. And now it's obvious that it's not healthy for you. And I think that years down the road, it's going to be the same kind of thing with vaping. So